From the early divide between Professor X and Magneto, to the ideological standoff between Rogue and Cyclops and Raid on Grey Malkin, dive into the most powerful rifts that tore the X-Men apart. The X-Men have always rallied behind Professor X's hope for harmony between mutants and humans, but they often clashed over the best way to reach that goal. Sometimes pushed by deep beliefs, other times manipulated by outside forces, these heroes and their allies have turned on one another more often than you'd think. What began as small arguments between comrades sometimes escalated into all-out wars that shook the very foundations of their world. The split between Rogue's crew and Cyclops' faction exploded during Raid on Grey Malkin, a 4-issue event that reached its climax in Uncanny X-Men issue 8. We're revisiting the X-Men's fiercest internal conflicts, how they started, why they spiraled, and how they changed mutant kind forever. At the heart of the X-Men's legacy lies the philosophical split between Charles Xavier and Magneto. Long before mutants became household names, Charles and Eric formed a friendship that eventually fractured over their opposing worldviews, as seen in Uncanny X-Men issue 161. Charles believed in building a peaceful bridge between mutants and humanity, while Magneto believed mutants were the next stage of evolution and should act like it. The two grew close while stopping Baron Strucker's gold heist, but Magneto walked away when their conflicting ideals proved impossible to reconcile. As time passed, Charles's hopeful vision fueled the X-Men, while Magneto's fiercer beliefs gave rise to groups like the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants and later, the Acolytes. Time and again, Xavier's and Magneto's forces clashed, sometimes as enemies, sometimes as reluctant allies. Both sides saw their teammates switch loyalties, Quicksilver and Colossus being just two examples of surprising turncoats. Even Magneto softened enough at times to stand with the X-Men, while Xavier once sank so low, he sided with Magneto's Brotherhood. After the X-Men splintered and scattered across the cosmos, they eventually came together again for the Muir Island Saga, which kicked off in Uncanny X-Men. At this time, Cyclops, Jean Grey, and the rest of the original X-Men regrouped under the name X-Factor, while another squad, including Wolverine, Storm, and Gambit, was off-planet dealing with the Shi'ar Empire. Back on Earth, a handful of mutants had taken refuge on Muir Island, where they were working alongside longtime ally, Moira McTaggart. Unfortunately, the Shadow King had also made his way to Muir Island and began manipulating Colossus, Rogue, Polaris, Psylocke, Legion, and other X-Men through his telepathic powers. He used them as pawns, turning friend against friend until Forge and Professor X ultimately defeated him and ended his reign of control. By the story's end, with over a dozen mutants regrouped, the Muir Island Saga laid the groundwork for the X-Men's reformation into the Blue and Gold teams, along with a newly minted government-backed X-Factor unit that kicked off one of their most memorable eras. Originally created to train the next generation of heroes, the New Mutants began to shift under the command of the mysterious time traveler Cable. Once he arrived in the present, the team transitioned into X-Force, a much more assertive squad that actively pursued enemies like the Mutant Liberation Front. Tensions erupted during the Executioner's Song storyline when Strife, Cable's twisted clone, attempted to assassinate Professor X in Uncanny X-Men, heightening the rift between X-Force and the rest of the X-Men. In the aftermath, the X-Men and X-Factor tracked down X-Force, suspecting Cable's involvement in the attempted murder. Even though Cable was no longer with them, X-Force stood their ground, clashed with the other teams, and were eventually taken into custody. After Strife was brought down, Storm and Professor X had a heartfelt conversation with Cannonball about X-Force's role within the mutant community and their relationship with law and order. Cable stepped away as the team's de facto leader, but his imprint remained, cementing X-Force's identity as a rebellious outlaw force. Though they were often at odds, years of fighting side by side helped Cyclops and Wolverine build a reluctant mutual respect. That bond shattered in X-Men Schism issue 1, when a major disagreement between them caused a long-lasting divide in the mutant community. When the Hellfire Club launched a brutal assault, Cyclops ordered a young mutant named Idie to kill the attackers, marking the breaking point between the two leaders. Though the X-Men had grown more aggressive under Scott Summers' leadership, Wolverine couldn't accept the direction things were heading, especially Cyclops' choice to send young mutants into harm's way. During a brutal Sentinel attack, the two longtime teammates came to blows, and in the aftermath, they chose to go their separate ways. Cyclops stayed behind on Utopia, joined by powerful allies and former enemies like Magneto and Emma Frost, while Wolverine returned to Westchester, New York, to reopen the X-Mansion as the Jean Grey School for Higher Learning. From that moment on, the X-Men community split nearly down the middle, some siding with Cyclops' hard-edged vision, others drawn to Wolverine's focus on guidance and protection. When Avengers vs. X-Men erupted, the rift between the two camps deepened into a full-on conflict, fueled by the arrival of the Phoenix Force. After Iron Man tried to stop the entity and accidentally fractured it, 5 mutants, Cyclops, Emma Frost, Colossus, Magic, and Namor, became its hosts. At first, this Phoenix 5 used their new powers to help uplift mutant kind, but the overwhelming energy quickly corrupted them. As trust broke down, many from Cyclops' camp defected to Wolverine's side and allied with the Avengers to stop their former friends. Cyclops spiraled further, ultimately killing Professor X and cutting himself off from the rest of the mutant world. Soon after, the X-Men cut ties with key figures like Magneto and Emma Frost, adding even more strain to their already fractured ranks. Branded as enemies and fugitives, the Phoenix 5 became symbols of division, wounds that would take years to even begin to heal. Later, during Secret Empire, Hydra replaced Captain America with a loyal clone, who helped the villainous group seize control of the United States. To keep mutants pacified, the false Captain America carved out a territory in the western U.S. called New Tian, a mutant-run nation born of compromise. Despite its troubling origins, New Tian gave mutants a brief window of calm, led by Emma Frost and the masked mutant healer, Zorn. But as time wore on, Emma's darker instincts resurfaced. Anyone, mutant or human, who spoke out against Hydra was locked away under her watch. In X-Men Blue issue 7, the young, time-displaced X-Men rejected the harsh tactics of the White Queen and decided to break the prisoners free themselves. During the escape, they clashed with the New Tian Strike Force, an elite team made up of seasoned mutants like Havoc, Marrow, Wolfsbane, Firestar, Toad, and Mondo. Despite earlier divisions, many of these same mutants ultimately stood together to take down Hydra and the fake Captain America. Krakoa briefly gave mutants a sense of shared purpose and power, but once it fell, the X-Men splintered once again. Cyclops set up a covert team in an abandoned Sentinel factory in Alaska, while Rogue formed her own squad of veteran X-Men to safeguard young mutants in Louisiana. At the same time, Dr. Karina Ellis and her anti-mutant regime seized the former X-Mansion and converted it into a high-security mutant prison called Grey Malkin. When Ellis's forces captured Beast, Jubilee, and a young mutant named Calico, both Cyclops and Rogue launched plans to get their people back. As Cyclops assembled a lean strike team for a swift and surgical mission, he and Rogue locked horns over how to approach the rescue. The tension peaked when they disagreed on whether to free Charles Xavier from the prison. Rogue believed no one should be left behind, but Cyclops insisted Xavier had to answer for the pain he caused both mutants and humans, driving a deeper wedge between their groups. Now that Krakoa lies in ruins, the path forward for mutants is once again fractured, with each team forging its own direction. How do you feel about the X-Men's history of inner conflict? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.